Title: The seller left a motivational letter and a key to a room that doesn't exist. Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. The story begins. When the house was listed online, it looked ordinary. A quiet property with clean photos, cheap price, and a single previous owner who had supposedly moved away suddenly. But when the new buyer opened the envelope left behind, he discovered two things: a motivational letter and a rusted key labeled with a room that wasn't on the floor plan. By the time he understood why, leaving the house was no longer possible. The house sat at the end of a quiet street where the trees grew too close together and sunlight seemed to fade earlier than everywhere else. It had been listed online for less than half the average price of other houses nearby, which should have been suspicious. Instead, it felt like luck. The buyer was a man named Adrian Keller, someone who believed deeply in the idea of fresh starts. At 32 years old, he had just left behind a collapsing job, a relationship that ended without explanation, and a small apartment that never felt like home. The listing for the house appeared during one of those sleepless nights when he had been scrolling endlessly through property listings. The photographs were simple. A small two-story structure with gray siding, narrow windows, and a front porch that looked slightly crooked. The inside photos showed empty rooms with bare floors and pale walls. Nothing about the house looked impressive, but nothing looked wrong either. What made Adrian hesitate was the price. It was so low that it almost felt like a mistake. Still, curiosity won. He contacted the listing agent and arranged a viewing the following morning. The real estate agent barely spoke during the tour. She unlocked the door, stepped aside, and let Adrian walk through the house on his own. Something about her expression suggested she wanted the visit to end as quickly as possible. Inside, the house felt strangely quiet. The silence had a density to it, as if sound itself struggled to exist within the walls. Adrian walked through the room slowly. The living room was empty except for dust patterns where furniture once sat. The kitchen had old cabinets and a sink that dripped once every few minutes, the sound echoing farther than it should have. Upstairs were 3 bedrooms, each with narrow windows that framed the darkening trees outside. Everything appeared ordinary. And yet something about the layout felt subtly wrong. The hallway upstairs seemed longer than it looked from the outside of the house. Adrian counted the doors twice, trying to match them with the windows he had seen from the yard earlier. 3 bedrooms. 1 bathroom. Nothing else. Still, the hallway felt like it should lead somewhere further. He dismissed the thought quickly. Old houses often created strange illusions with their layouts. The tour ended quickly. The agent locked the door again and barely met Adrian's eyes while handing him the paperwork. The previous owner, she explained briefly, had moved away unexpectedly and wanted the house sold as soon as possible. No negotiation. No inspection requirements. Just a fast sale. Adrian signed the documents that same week. The move happened quietly. He brought only a few boxes, some furniture, and the feeling that he was beginning something better. On the first evening inside the house, Adrian noticed the envelope. It sat alone on the kitchen counter. The paper looked old, slightly yellowed, and sealed with careful precision. Written across the front in thin handwriting were the words, "For the next owner." Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a letter. The message read like something meant to inspire. The previous owner described the house as a place of transformation, a place where people discovered who they truly were. The tone was strangely enthusiastic, filled with phrases about perseverance, personal growth, and embracing challenges. At first it felt like nothing more than an oddly personal farewell note. But at the bottom of the envelope, Adrian found something else. A key. It was small and heavy, made of dark metal that looked older than the house itself. Tied to the key was a thin paper tag. Written on it were 4 words. Room below the hall. Adrian turned the tag over several times, expecting to find more explanation. There was none. The phrase made no sense. He knew the layout of the house already. There was no room below the hall. The first floor sat directly beneath the hallway upstairs, but the space was occupied by the living room ceiling. The letter did not mention the key at all. That absence felt strange. Adrian placed the key back inside the envelope and told himself it was probably nothing more than an old spare for a door that had been replaced long ago. Still, he kept thinking about the phrase, "Room below the hall." That night he walked upstairs again. The hallway looked even longer in the dim light. 3 bedroom doors. 1 bathroom. No hidden spaces. Adrian knelt and pressed his ear against the floorboards near the center of the hallway. He wasn't sure why he did it. Maybe curiosity. Maybe something deeper. For a moment there was nothing but silence. Then he heard something faint. A hollow sound. The wood beneath that section of the hallway didn't feel solid like the rest of the floor. It sounded empty. Adrian tapped the boards lightly with his knuckles. The hollow echo spread beneath the floor like a quiet drum. His stomach tightened. There shouldn't have been empty space there. The structure of the house didn't allow it. He went downstairs and stood in the living room, staring at the ceiling where the hallway should have been. Everything looked normal. Flat plaster. Smooth surface. No seams. No hidden panels. But the memory of the hollow sound upstairs refused to leave his mind. Over the next few days, Adrian began examining the house more closely. He measured the hallway length with a tape measure. He walked around the outside of the house, studying the foundation and the placement of the windows. The numbers never matched. According to the exterior measurements, the hallway should have been nearly 6 feet shorter than it actually was. That meant one thing. There was space hidden somewhere within the walls. Space that didn't appear on the floor plan. Space that shouldn't exist. By the 5th night, Adrian couldn't ignore it anymore. He returned upstairs with the envelope in his hand. The key felt heavier than before. Standing in the middle of the hallway, he pressed his foot against the same section of floorboards. The hollow echo answered him again. This time the sound carried further. As if the empty space beneath the floor had grown larger. Adrian crouched down and ran his fingers along the wood carefully. For several minutes he found nothing. Then he noticed a faint seam running between 2 boards. It was so thin it could have been mistaken for a natural gap in the wood. But the seam continued in a perfect rectangle. Adrian pressed harder. One of the boards shifted slightly under his weight. The movement was small but unmistakable. A section of the hallway floor slowly lifted upward, revealing darkness beneath it. The opening was narrow, just wide enough for a person to climb through. A wooden ladder descended into blackness. Adrian stared into the hidden space for a long time. Cold air drifted upward from below, carrying a faint smell of damp wood and something older. Something buried. His mind searched for explanations. Secret storage. Old construction flaw. Forgotten cellar. But the shape of the opening suggested something far more deliberate. Someone had built this place to remain hidden. The envelope trembled slightly in Adrian's hand. For the first time, he noticed a final line written at the bottom of the motivational letter. It was so small he had overlooked it earlier. The sentence was written in a different ink. The handwriting looked rushed. If you find the room below the hall, remember this. The first night is always the quietest. Adrian looked down at the key again. The tag still read the same words. Room below the hall. The darkness beneath the ladder felt deeper now. Almost expectant. For a moment Adrian considered closing the panel and pretending none of it existed. But curiosity has a way of overpowering caution. He took the key. Then he began climbing down into the hidden space. The ladder creaked softly under his weight. With every step the air grew colder. By the time his feet touched the floor below, the hallway above already felt impossibly far away. And in the darkness of the hidden room, Adrian realized something far worse than discovering a secret chamber beneath his house. The room already contained things. Many things. Objects left behind by the previous owner. And in the center of the floor, illuminated by the faint light from above, lay a second letter waiting for him. Adrian hadn't even opened it yet. But somehow he already knew one thing with absolute certainty. The motivational letter upstairs had never been meant to encourage him. It had been meant to prepare him. Adrian stood in the hidden room for several seconds without moving. The ladder above him disappeared into the narrow opening in the hallway floor, leaving only a weak beam of light stretching down into the chamber. Dust floated slowly through the air, drifting like tiny insects in the pale glow. The room was larger than it should have been. From the outside, the space beneath the hallway could only have been a narrow cavity between the floors. Instead, the chamber stretched much farther in every direction, its walls made of old wood darkened by time and moisture. The geometry of the room felt wrong. Adrian tried to imagine how the space could physically exist inside the house, but the dimensions refused to make sense. The chamber seemed deeper than the entire width of the building. The longer he stared, the more unsettling it felt. Then he looked down at the floor. Objects had been carefully arranged throughout the room. Not furniture. Not storage. Memories. There were boxes filled with photographs, journals stacked in uneven piles, small personal belongings that looked like they had once belonged to different people. A cracked wristwatch. A pair of eyeglasses. A faded scarf folded neatly beside a stack of papers. None of the items looked like they belonged to the previous owner. They looked like they belonged to strangers. In the center of the room lay the second letter. The envelope had already been opened. Adrian knelt slowly and picked up the paper. The handwriting matched the motivational letter from the kitchen. But the tone was completely different. The message began with a sentence that made Adrian's chest tighten. The previous owner wrote that every person who moved into the house eventually discovered the hidden room beneath the hallway. Curiosity always led them there. It was inevitable. The writer explained that the house was older than any official record suggested. Long before the current structure had been built, something else had existed on that land. Something that created spaces where rooms did not follow the rules of the physical world. The hidden chamber was one of those places. It could not be mapped, could not be measured. The room expanded slowly over time. Adrian continued reading. The previous owner described how the room changed after it was discovered. At first it remained quiet. Empty. But after the first night, the objects inside the chamber began to grow in number. New items appeared without explanation. Small belongings belonging to people the homeowner had never met. Photographs of strangers. Letters written by hands that had never entered the house. The message continued with a disturbing certainty. The room was not collecting objects. It was collecting people. Adrian lowered the letter slowly. The silence in the chamber felt heavier now. He turned toward the piles of belongings scattered around the room. Each item had once belonged to someone. Someone who had disappeared. Someone who had lived in the house before him. A faint sound moved through the chamber. Adrian froze. The noise had come from somewhere deeper in the darkness beyond the light from the ladder. It was soft and irregular, like something shifting slowly across the floor. He listened carefully. The room returned to silence. Adrian tried to convince himself that the sound had only been the old wood settling beneath the house. But the feeling in his stomach refused to disappear. He looked back at the letter and continued reading. The previous owner described what happened after the room began collecting belongings. The house itself started to change. Doors occasionally appeared where there had never been doors before. Walls felt thicker. Hallways grew slightly longer. Every change was subtle enough that it could almost be ignored. But each alteration meant the room below was expanding, growing stronger. The letter warned that the room did not simply exist beneath the hallway. It was slowly spreading through the structure of the house. And eventually it would begin reaching upward. Adrian's pulse quickened. He glanced toward the ladder leading back to the hallway. The light above seemed dimmer than before. For a moment he wondered how long he had already been standing in the chamber. The final paragraphs of the letter were written in hurried handwriting. The previous owner admitted that leaving the house had become impossible after discovering the room. Anyone who learned about it became connected to the space in ways that were difficult to explain. The house would always lead them back. Even if they physically walked away. Even if they tried to abandon the property forever. The room would follow. That was why the previous owner sold the house so quickly. The letter ended with one final warning. The first night was always the quietest. After that, the room began to notice its new occupant. Adrian felt a cold weight settle in his chest. A new sound echoed through the darkness. This time it was louder. Something scraped slowly against the wooden floor somewhere beyond the edge of the light. Adrian stood quickly and turned toward the ladder. The beam of light from above flickered faintly. The opening in the hallway suddenly looked much farther away. Another sound followed. Soft movement. Slow breathing. Adrian's eyes adjusted to the darkness just enough to see the deeper sections of the chamber. The room extended much farther than he had realized earlier, and the shadows inside it were shifting. Something was moving within the darkness. Not quickly, not aggressively, just slowly, approaching the light. Adrian stepped backward toward the ladder. His foot struck one of the boxes on the floor, spilling photographs across the wood. The pictures slid through the dust, scattering in every direction. Adrian looked down at them briefly. Each photograph showed a different person standing inside the house. Different decades, different clothing, different faces. But every picture had one thing in common. Each person stood in the hallway upstairs. And behind them, barely visible in the shadows, was the open floor panel leading to the hidden room. The scraping sound grew closer. Adrian forced himself to look back into the darkness. A shape was emerging now. Tall, thin, too tall to be a person. The figure moved slowly forward, its limbs bending at angles that did not belong to the human body. Adrian climbed the ladder immediately. The wood creaked violently under his weight as he rushed upward. The air above the hallway felt warmer, brighter, safer. He pulled himself through the opening and slammed the floor panel shut behind him. The hallway returned to silence. Adrian lay on the floor for several minutes, trying to calm the violent rhythm of his heartbeat. Eventually he stood and stepped away from the panel. The house looked exactly the same. 3 bedroom doors. 1 bathroom. A long hallway that seemed slightly longer than it had earlier. Adrian walked downstairs slowly. The envelope from the first letter still rested on the kitchen counter. Everything appeared calm. Ordinary. For a moment he wondered if he had imagined everything beneath the house. Then he noticed something new. A small object sitting beside the envelope. It hadn't been there before. Adrian approached carefully. The object was a photograph. The paper was still warm. His hands trembled as he picked it up. The image showed the hallway upstairs. The floor panel was open. The ladder extended down into darkness. And standing beside the opening was Adrian himself. The picture had been taken only moments earlier. But Adrian knew with absolute certainty that no one else had been in the house. He turned the photograph over slowly. Written on the back were 4 familiar words. Room below the hall. Below them was a second line written in darker ink. The handwriting matched the letters. Welcome to the collection. From somewhere deep beneath the hallway, Adrian heard the floorboards creak softly. Something below had started moving again. And this time it was climbing. Some houses hide secrets in the attic. Others bury them in the basement. But sometimes a house hides a room that shouldn't exist at all, a place that slowly collects the people who discover it. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more dark horror stories uploaded regularly. And remember, if you ever find a key labeled with a room that doesn't exist, never try to unlock it.